Well, hello and welcome everyone to the very first Ready Set live stream. The theme for this first event is Ready Set Scale for Kubernetes, and we'll be discussing the challenges and opportunities for Kubernetes in the enterprise. My name is Greg Neerman, and I'll be hosting this event for the next hour with a spectacular set of presenters and panelists. Let me first introduce our keynote speaker, Nigel Poulton, author of the Kubernetes book. Now, I got to make a disclaimer here. Nigel and I go back a few years, probably more than we care to remember, well before Kubernetes or Docker were even known words. Nigel's also a prolific Pluralsight Kubernetes trainer who will walk us through the challenges and opportunities for Kubernetes. I'm also joined by Beth Busenhart and Chris Merge from NetApp as they discuss the future state for developers in Kubernetes ecosystems. Next, George Tarani will walk us through the new Project Astra that simplifies operations for data-rich stateful applications. Then we'll have what I promise will be a lively panel discussion with representatives from across the industry who I'd like to introduce now. First, Ram Vandenpoel, Cloud Architect for Red Hat. Jason Benedicic, Independent Consultant. Karen Lopez, Senior Project Manager and Architect at Info Advisors. Michael Cade, Senior Global Technologist at Veeam Software. Cheryl Hung, Director of Ecosystem at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And finally, Ed Baldoff, Customer Engineer at Google Cloud. And if you are watching this on LinkedIn or YouTube, we encourage you to add your questions and comments into this live streams directly or on Twitter with the hashtag NetApp. And we'll do our very best to get to those live or with our teams in those channels. And with the introductions out of the way, I'd like to introduce my friend and our keynote speaker, Nigel Poulton. And don't forget, you'll see the link below here in the video. You can get Nigel's book, the Kubernetes book, free by going to his site and registering for that. So take it away, Nigel.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate your time. So we have this tradition in the kind of containers and Kubernetes community where we sacrifice something to the demo gods if we're doing a live demo. Now, I'm not doing a live demo today, but live streaming seems to be the new thing. So I have this new laptop here that's not working, and I am sacrificing this to the live stream gods. Anyway, look, Kubernetes is hot. We all know that. It's probably why we're here. And when you get a hot new technology like this, you get extremes of opinions, and it's hard to like boil it down to what is true. Okay, so on the one side, you get the people that think it is the best thing since sliced bread, and it's going to cure all of their problems, and it's just going to make life a dream. Okay, then on the other side, you've got the haters. And these guys quite often think that in the case of containers and Kubernetes, it is software-defined evil, okay? Now, there's valid points to what both sides have to say, but the purpose of this live stream right now, and for me speaking to you, is to kind of take the bits that are probably correct from both sides, boil it down, and let's get to the truth of what's going on. The problem is, right, everything that you're going to hear is my opinion. So a very, very brief background on who I am. So I'm Nigel, right? I got involved with Docker when it was using LXC. I think Docker 0.8 or 0.9, and I've been all in on it ever since then. Like Greg said, I write books on Docker and Kubernetes, and I train people using video training, and I've reached over 1 million people, which is cool, right? But I'm sure it makes you all think, okay, so this guy is going to be one of the lovers, right? He thinks it's the best thing ever. Well, actually, that is not the case, okay? I am more than happy to talk about the things that I don't think work. So I'm going to cover 3 things today, right? I'm going to talk about complexity, security, and persisting data. Now, on the complexity front, right, I want to sort of set the bar at a realistic level, okay? Yes, Kubernetes is all of 6 years old. I think we first saw it in June of 2014, if my math is right. And 6 years might seem like a long time for technology to mature and to become stable and less complex than it currently is. But we have to keep in mind, right, that Kubernetes makes its living pretty much on the bleeding edge of cloud computing, which is a very, very, very fast-moving target. So I'm setting the scene there, right? Now, I'm not being a shill. It could be a lot less complex than it currently is. But if we wind the clock back like 2 or 3 years and compare today to back then I promise you where we are today is a whole world better. Is it where it needs to be for, I think, wider scale adoption, especially in more traditional enterprises? Then absolutely it's not. There are too many rough edges and far too many parts of the project are disjointed. So we need to smooth out those edges, okay, and get things integrated a lot better. The thing is, right, that doesn't happen by magic. Just because it's open source doesn't mean that there's this army of high quality developers that all they want to do with their whole life is work on smoothing out Kubernetes. It's not true, okay? Yes, there are great people working on it, but we need more people working on it from the vendors and from some of the applications as well. Now, let me talk about some things that are good, that are better. I think installing Kubernetes is a lot better than it used to be, especially if you go on one of the hosted options on the cloud. Also, core features are pretty good now. I would say Kubernetes is pretty good at deploying simple application workloads. Where the rough edges exist tend to be on the more stateful applications and the more enterprise application use cases. And I might come back to that again in a second. Let's talk about security real quick, though. I want to set the bar again, though, right? We all use everyday technologies that are not secure, and we sleep well at night despite the fact that we're doing that. So I don't want us to expect that Kubernetes or containers or any other technology, right, should be 100% secure. No technology is. We all use a mobile phone or a laptop, right? They're great for improving our productivity, so we kind of have to use them. But we know that they're vulnerable to certain attacks and they expose us in scary ways sometimes. But we don't run away from them. We take other technologies, we layer security applications and things around them on all of our phones and laptops. I'm sure we've got antivirus, anti-malware, anti-ransomware. It's just the way we run, right? We take something that is great and gives us loads of benefits, but it's not perfectly secure, and we work hard to add extra security layers. It's security 101, right? Now, are containers less secure out of the box than virtual machines? For sure they are, but take that with a pinch of salt with what I've just said there, right? There are products out there that help us secure containers, and there are more products coming that help us add more security layers and secure the wider application as well that's running on containers and Kubernetes. Now, we need more of these products, okay? And the security products that we have at the moment are sometimes prohibitively difficult and complex. They need to get a lot easier, okay? So I would wrap up security by saying, yes, of course, there are security concerns, but just don't be afraid of that. Let it give you the respect that security requires, and then take the necessary steps to deal with it. Now, let me move quickly on to persisting data, okay? I think volumes and storage are late to the containers and Kubernetes party, but there's a valid reason for that, right? Doing storage properly and protecting vitally important business data is both extremely hard and extremely important, right? We all know that a lot of the traditional storage vendors charge a lot of money for their products, but they are built the absolute best way possible. None of those vendors wants to be associated with losing data because they're out of business like that, right? So doing doing storage and persisting data is very hard. Implementing it the right way in Kubernetes is also hard, okay? But I feel like we're still very early in this part of the journey. So it feels like Kubernetes, through projects like the container storage interface and some of the Kubernetes primitives in the persistent volume subsystem, we're getting kind of the Kubernetes primitives in place, okay? But we need more work from the storage vendors on one side to plug in properly and expose their enterprise-grade features. But then on the far end, we've got the applications. I don't know, MongoDB, CouchDB, SQL Server, things like that also have to be able to plug in. And we need this like sort of fully integrated end-to-end from the vendor through Kubernetes into the application. And we are sadly nowhere near that, in my opinion, at the moment. But with vendors like NetApp and all these other people coming to the party now, maybe we can get everybody in that kind of perfect storm to join together, sew everything up, and move us certainly in that right direction. So yes, Kubernetes is still complex, but it is way less complex than it used to be. Security, don't be overly afraid of it, right? But treat it with respect, okay? It absolutely must be treated with respect. And persistent data, it's a long journey. I think we're getting there. I think I'll wrap up, though, by saying there's no point moaning about any of these things. We've all got to roll up our sleeves. The vendors, the community, all of us pitch into this together, and we can bring it and haul it forward in the right direction. I, for one, think that the future is bright. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Beth and Chris.
Thanks, Nigel. You've raised a lot of good points here, and appreciate being part of this conversation. I'm here with my colleague, Chris Mers, who is a principal technologist covering all things cloud native for NetApp. Thanks for joining me here, Chris. Let's get right to it. So as Nigel alluded to, we hear a lot about Kubernetes becoming this de facto standard for application development. From your perspective, is this a foregone conclusion, or is there still a bit of hyperbole in that assertion?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask. I think a lot of folks will say it's hyperbole at this point. But for myself and what I'm seeing from startups all the way through to global enterprises, this is going to be a de facto standard going forward. End of story. I can support that with something like 78% of organizations are using Kubernetes in production today. Obviously, Kubernetes won the orchestrator wars a couple years back. So containers being the delivery mechanism for modern application development makes a lot of sense. You're talking about a subsystem of the Linux operating system or a part of that, and it's ubiquitous. Everyone can, the idea is you're able to write your application and run it anywhere. And I don't think that that kind of abstraction or that type of utility is going to go out of style anytime soon. Mm-hmm. And I haven't seen anything better in the past with Waterfall or Early Agile or whatever.
Yeah, sounds good. You've in terms of becoming ubiquitous, it's not just the early adopters that are necessary to make that happen. And you've been on that end of it, experiencing firsthand the benefits of implementing a hybrid cloud strategy when you were in the startup space. Now you're talking to enterprise level customers and speaking with them about how their aspirations for a cloud native strategy. Are the challenges the same, or are they evolving? Are there different considerations?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when you're talking about a large organization, they're a lot more conservative by nature. When you're dealing with a startup, you're dealing with greenfield, probably internet startup for open source types who are shooting from the hip, ready to build. You won't get a lot of process and personnel pushback for changing how you're doing things in a greenfield environment. In an enterprise situation, you got a lot of brownfield, you got a huge organization, a lot of moving parts, and a lot of people who are resistant to change. And that's going to be the challenge that really is in the forefront for adopting any type of transformation technology, whether we go all the way back to Linux in the enterprise, we talk about DevOps, or we talk about hybrid cloud, or we talk about cloud native. This is reminiscent to me. It reminds me of getting Linux into the enterprise way back when, and that would only happen at the enterprise level when there was support, a support contract, when they could dial a friend, because open source is great if your engineering time is free, right? Point being is that I've been through a couple of rounds of this, and we're solving those problems early out front, probably in better, honestly, ways that are more functional than the old OpenStack adventure that we were on for a little bit. And sorry, I love OpenStack, I really do, and Cinder was one of my favorite things in the world, and DBAS, the Trove thing. But anyway, point being is that right now what we're looking for is patterns that we're going to be able to replicate throughout an enterprise, the same as you would replicate it in a smaller number of iterations for a startup company.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing there is scale is a big challenge here. It's kind of a buzzword, but let's talk a little bit about that.
When the rubber hits the road, yeah. And when the rubber hits the road, it's all about scale. I spent the first decade of my career working for a global hosting company, big telecom, and it's all about scale. When you're helping hundreds of thousands of customers get online, get their businesses going, now with where we're at now, global enterprises, Fortune 500s, government agencies, militaries, educational systems, working with these, every day with architects from these types of organizations every day. And everyone is looking to cloud native. Everyone is looking to Kubernetes. It might be a long journey for them. It might be, 1 to 10 years, but they're all going in that direction because that's the modality that developers, modern application developers, are used to using. Folks coming out of university haven't used anything else. Get your head wrapped around that for a second. Never used a VM. Folks coming out of university have never used a VM in production to actually deploy production code. They use containers, and that's what I'm seeing all over the place. And it's interesting times. The future is bright, as Nigel was saying earlier.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I understand within these organizations there are often small subsets of developers that are are using cloud native best practices like in DevOps, like CI/CD. You know, they're running some applications in containers, or they're using Ansible to automate certain tasks. But just to roll this out throughout the enterprise, where's the sticking point?
Well, you need a cohesive infrastructure, right? You need a cohesive architecture that allows you to push CI/CD and automation, make it available to everyone in the organization in every development group. But you have to be able to secure it by line of business, so a vertical from the code on down to production, so that folks can really pay attention to the path. That's what the SRE's job. Promoting the culture, promoting the utility, promoting the idea that this isn't something that's going to limit people's careers. It's going to enhance their careers. Say I'm in IT ops and I'm a storage admin or a network guy. This isn't going to be the end of what I do. This is a continuation of my specialty. A storage admin who may be doing tuning knobs and whatnot on a storage array today, tomorrow may be composing a hybrid cloud data plane. It's just a different take on, frankly, the same compute, networking, and storage we've been dealing with for a very, very long time. That's not changing. The fundamental resources aren't changing here. It's the way we present them and consume them. And getting adoption throughout your organization is both a people problem and a technology problem. If you have a automated DevOps platform with hybrid cloud extensions, you can start doing cloud native anywhere and everywhere today. You mentioned or alluded to enterprise applications. I know you have a special place in your heart for databases from way back when. So talk to me a little bit about the intersection of the data and the application development. Because as Nigel talked about, persistent volumes are a big challenge. So where's the sweet spot here? So yeah, persistence. So these crown jewel applications, these large enterprise, especially database applications, have always been kind of the sticking point. It's the square peg in the round hole of DevOps, if you will. And that's always been a problem. Now we move into containerization and cloud native. Okay, you're containerizing your apps. Containers were meant to be a stateless form of application development from the get-go, and you were going to use an external service for state. Now all that's changed. Everybody and their mother is throwing everything into containers. So you've got MongoDB and other things like that being the top downloaded. These are the top patterns people are using for deploying applications in containers. I think more than 5 out of the top 10 are stateful applications, rich stateful applications, which poses a set of problems. So I have an associated PVC, an attached data volume. What if I want to move this application, not just around my infrastructure on-prem or around the cloud that I'm using, in one of the public clouds? What if I need to move it to an entirely different cloud or entirely different infrastructure? What if I need HA? What if I need DR? What if I have issues with the data volume mapping and the database goes sideways because it can't remain consistent anymore? These are problems that need to be handled. When you take a snapshot of a volume, is it consistent? Most applications in the Kubernetes space, you don't even worry about that. It's a snapshot. But with these, when you have lots of different I/O streams going on, you have to have it can't be a jagged cut. You have to actually have a consistent state when you snapshot it. There's all these considerations taken in when you are using containers, which is frankly not, and Kubernetes, which is not quite as developed for enterprise applications, including databases. I'm an old Sybase guy myself, if anyone remembers that, so it goes way back for me. And then I was the MongoDB guy for a while. But the point being is that as we move towards hardcore infrastructure and putting everything into a single, utility plane in Kubernetes, yes, we can put everything in there, but we need to do it right. We need to consider what our persistence layer looks like, how it connects, how it connects to a multi-cloud, et cetera, so forth. There's just a lot more to do. But luckily, companies and vendors especially, are taking their customers seriously and addressing those concerns.
Yes, and that's kind of a good segue, because NetApp is definitely one of those vendors and partners that is very committed to the success of our customers. And having identified the sweet spot where we can bring everything that we have to bear in the storage space and our experience and expertise in Kubernetes, brings us to the next wave of investment for NetApp, which is Project Astra. And today we have George Tehrani here, who is going to tell us a little bit more about what's next in the cloud native and Kubernetes space for NetApp.
I think, Chris, that was a great conversation, and thank you for setting me up for this next discussion here. Good day, everybody. Hope you're doing well. I'm George Tehrani. I look after NetApp's Kubernetes and cloud native data portfolio, and I'm here to introduce Project Astra to you. The open source journey for NetApp actually started before there even was a Kubernetes. By container standards, as Nigel mentioned, that was eons ago, 2014, 2015 timeframe. And NetApp introduced the first external dynamic storage provisioner for Kubernetes in 2016, and that was called Trident. Some of you may be familiar with it. And really, that was sort of our entree into understanding exactly how customers use and operationalize storage in Kubernetes for stateful applications. Armed with that information, we identified where the gaps were, and really that's probably where the Project Astra was conceived. So let's talk about that a bit. Project Astra is a Kubernetes native software as a service platform that'll deliver robust data services for stateful applications. And quite aptly, Astra in Greek mythology means divine strength, and that's what we believe we're going to be introducing to the community. What are stateful applications? Well, just about every application of value needs to have a persistent piece of storage that it can use over time. And it, this obviously gets more complicated when you need to perform core data management functions such as backup and restore and disaster recovery. As Kubernetes practitioners, we know that containers and Kubernetes speed our development, but they introduce some complexity. Specifically, managing persistent data and providing single application consistent set of policies is quite difficult. Another important component is really its management control plane. The thing to note here is that our value is in the data, but it's also really in the applications, the combination of both applications and the data the application uses. So the Astra Control Tower, which is our admin console, if you would, gives us the ability to manage data lifecycle in a multi-cluster, multi-cloud environment. In summary, I would say Astra is an initiative aimed at developing data lifecycle management for Kubernetes and containerized applications, and it provides software-defined architecture and set of tools that can be that you could plug into a Kubernetes environment of any distribution and manage the environment. So let me show you exactly what I mean by this with this high-level demo of Project Astra. This is Project Astra workflows, as well as an overview of common deployment models and use cases. Project Astra by NetApp is a cloud-native solution focused on application data lifecycle management in the Kubernetes environment. The primary goal of Astra is to simplify the consumption of storage while managing the end-to-end data lifecycle for stateful workloads. Astra itself is Kubernetes native and is offered as a cloud service. Astra provides key data services that are critical to the operation of popular enterprise applications. These include SQL and NoSQL databases, messaging, search and indexing, AI/ML analytics, and dev test CI/CD pipelines. Astra understands the application construct in containers and delivers services through the custom resource framework, which is widely used by the ecosystem to extend Kubernetes functionalities. A key differentiator in Astra is its ability to not only fulfill application data management in major public clouds, such as Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS, it also offers the same service level for on-premises enterprise data centers with NetApp Data Fabric. NetApp's Data Fabric is an architecture and a set of data services that provide consistent capabilities across a choice of endpoints spanning on-premises and multi-cloud. Amongst many layers of data services, Astra offers a control plane for applications data management.
Can I just check nobody can hear anything, right?
Data Fabric, it offers complete control over full stack application backup and restore, as well as clones, wherever they reside in the fabric. The user must initiate the discovery, and in a matter of seconds, Astra offers a complete list of applications running in those clusters. The Astra user decides which apps are registered for advanced data services. Additionally, Astra discovers the namespaces where those applications are running. It queries the Kubernetes API server to identify pods, config maps, secrets, and other objects associated with that namespace. Upon completion, Astra displays the namespace it has discovered in that cluster. By default, the application discovered in those namespaces are not registered. The user or administrator must explicitly decide to change its state to registered before Astra Data Services can take effect. Once registered, Astra will provide select services for those applications in that cluster. In this scenario, the administrator would like to move an application from one namespace to another in the same cluster. There are several scenarios that apply here, but this use case represents a backup and restore operation which consists of the entire application stack, not simply the volumes associated with those pods. Here's the basic workflow to back up and restore an application in the same cluster in a new namespace. The user selects an application to back up. Astra quiesces the application stack and captures application-consistent snapshots for the data volumes. Additionally, all configuration data, including config maps, pod specs, secrets, as well as other objects, are also captured, which are required to wholly restore the app in the target namespace. Then, Astra backs up the snapshots to a target, which could be native object storage services provided by the cloud service provider. Astra then creates a new namespace in the target cluster. Then, Astra fetches the configuration and snapshot data from object storage service to restore. After successfully restoring the app in the new namespace, Astra will continue to provide data management for this application as long as it remains a registered app. By design, Astra abstracts all complex tasks. From the user's perspective, this will appear as a single command or a click of a mouse. With Astra, customers can schedule application-consistent snapshots to improve RPO and RTO times. The portability and application consistency aspects of Astra offer a slew of advantages. They include restoring applications to a different Kubernetes cluster in the same or perhaps a new public cloud, or the entire cluster may be restored in the same as well as a new public cloud. And finally, it doesn't stop here. NetApp will continue to innovate and help our customers do more in Kubernetes with Astra. Hope you enjoyed that video. Let me invite Nigel back in for some Q&A.
Hey, George. So thanks for your time there. Can you just go like really big picture for me at the start, okay? Just kind of help me get an idea of what we're exactly looking at here. Is this a platform? Is it just a tool? Will it expand in the future in its scope? I heard you mention Kubernetes native.
Right. No, exactly right. So Project Astra, as we announced a few days back, is really a beginning of a project that we anticipate to grow beyond leaps and bounds, frankly. It is going to be a software as a service. It will be offered as a SaaS subscription model service, and really it provides the opportunity for customers to bring their own distribution of Kubernetes and decide which applications they wish to have Astra basically manage the entire data lifecycle. So it will be offered as a service, but again, the future is yet to be written. So we're open to all kinds of opportunities and ideas as we begin to begin this journey with our customers.
Okay. What about if I'm a customer in the enterprise and I don't have access to the internet, something like that?
That's actually a likely scenario, and we have thought of that. We call those types of scenarios or use cases air-gapped. There are particularly public sector, federal agencies, governments, healthcare providers, financial services. There are organizations that actually have specific requirements to not be connected to the cloud and or the internet. So we at the as the offering matures and we reach its sort of completion, we will also take into account use cases that will accommodate air-gapped use cases.
Okay, so maybe just 2 or 3 quick more questions. When will we actually see this? I'm thinking ballpark for general availability.
General availability is going to be later this year. As I mentioned, on the 22nd of April, we announced that we were going to open this up for private preview, and that will happen sometime second half of the month of May. And we anticipate by the time we go through the process of getting feedback from customers, ensuring that the assumptions that we have made are accurate, and also really take our customers' good ideas, incorporate it into the solution. It will take us a few cycles. So I'm thinking by sometime October, November timeframe, we should be able to open it up to the public.
Cool. Okay. So you said that it captures an entire application running on Kubernetes. So I'm assuming that will include things like secrets and config maps and all of that kind of jazz, right? Is that the case?
It is indeed, absolutely. As you well know, in today's Kubernetes, an application is defined by a collection of loose objects. The anticipation and how we intend to apply this framework is to really define exactly what an application means in the Kubernetes world, and that all the items that you mentioned, all the Kubernetes objects, inclusive of the volumes that are attached to those particular pods, will be effectively grouped and snapshotted in a way that it could be migrated from one cluster to another, or it could be moved from the cloud to the on-prem, and sort of vice versa. So the idea is to really, as I mentioned at the onset, is to not look at this purely from, looking at it from a volumes and LUNs perspective. This is really the actual working application working data that the application uses, and really migrate that from point A to point B.
I appreciate it's early days, so good luck in doing that, because it's very much needed. One last question then. I've forgotten my question that I had, George.
That's okay.
Oh no, here we go. So in discovering those applications, I was thinking to myself, is there like a subset of applications that you support at the moment? Because obviously it's a massive ecosystem out there. Kubernetes is complex, and it supports all of these different kinds of applications. Are you coming to market with like a pre-baked set at the start?
Yes, indeed. We're setting achievable goals, as they say. And you're exactly right. Applications of all kinds behave differently. There's obviously commercial applications that, you and Chris, referred to. There are going to be all kinds of homebrewed applications, that line of business applications that customers develop on their own. So from out of the gate, we will have an application catalog, a series of the most commonly used enterprise open source and commercial applications that Astra will support. And over time, we will increase we'll add to that list, if you would. But the idea again is to focus on specific areas where we know we can add value, and that will detail specific. That would entail specific applications such as MongoDB, various other database applications, and all those sort of commonly used enterprise applications that most of our customers use today.
Yeah, cool. I like it. I'm done.
Excellent. All right, I think we're bringing the panel back in here for a quick Q&A. So let me throw it back to you guys.
Fantastic, George. Thank you very much. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Chris. And of course, thank you, Nigel. And I just want to remind everybody, if you want to get more information, there's a link down at the bottom of this screen. And there's also, like I mentioned earlier, an opportunity for you to get Nigel's ebook, the Kubernetes book, free by just going to his website. So I want to thank everybody for the presentations there. But now I've got a ton of questions myself, but I want to throw this out to Cheryl first. Cheryl, any reflections or any questions you have?
Yeah, in fact, persistent storage is something that's very close to my heart. So before I joined the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, I was at a storage vendor for cloud native storage. So I joined in 2017, and I thought there would be 18 months. By mid-2019, stateful applications would be solved. I think we can comfortably say it's not a solved problem. So I'm really interested in Chris and George and the other panelists as well. At what point do you think running stateful applications will be just as easy as running stateless applications? So in like a year, 2 years, 5 or more?
George, what's your thoughts on that?
I don't have a crystal ball, Cheryl, but I'll tell you, I think, this particular endeavor that NetApp has taken on is really taking a concrete step towards that step. As you know, from the CNCF sort of storage spectrum, various vendors that participate in this particular segment, it's a vibrant environment. And the reason, as you pointed out, is also because this is real life. This is where, customers and enterprises and organizations of all sizes run their applications based on which they make decisions and forecast revenue and so forth. So enablement of this particular space is of paramount importance to NetApp, and this is one concrete step towards that goal. So from the perspective of NetApp, as I mentioned, Trident, of course, it's a bit of a cult following. It's been our integration for Kubernetes for nearly 4 years, and we've been quite successful as an open source project. But there are services that really require additional, added services in a way that cannot be packaged inside of a sort of an open source sort of solution, if you would. So Astra will provide those advantage services, but we will continue as a company to make vast contributions to the open source community, Kubernetes in particular, and of course Trident.
That's fantastic. Great question, Cheryl. I'm going to bounce it over to Karen here. Karen, I know you're particularly passionate about data. And I was wondering, do you have any reflections of how this relates within Kubernetes ecosystems, or any questions you might have as it relates to this?
Yeah, so I have an observation. Like, as I was listening to all of this and thinking about the persistent data problem and the difference between transient data, or mostly transient, and the large enterprise, large scale, half a petabyte traditional RDBMSs, isn't this just a problem of data gravity? That once the mass of data is so big, it becomes a physics problem, and we can't really bend physics or change it, in that those data stories of very large, needs to be highly available, needs to be highly consistent data, which isn't every data story. Isn't it just the fact that we have to bend around that data? And my follow-up is, so what sort of data stories do fit the orchestration and the container stories? Maybe Nigel first.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate that. I will address your questions there, Karen. I wanted to mention something towards Cheryl's question, though, because I've got into this kind of rut recently, and I've got really sad over persistent data in Kubernetes and containers. When you asked when do I think it will be ready, I'm of the opinion these days that it will be just about the very last thing to happen before the sun turns supernova. I genuinely have been sad about that. Now, George talks about making vast contributions to the open source community. And I'm going to hold you to that, George, because like I said in my keynote, there's the storage vendors and the Kubernetes community and the application vendors all need to come together for that. So I'm holding you to it, George. As a storage vendor, you better come to that party and bring your A game. I think getting to your questions, Karen, like, it doesn't feel to me like it's, and if I'm answering your question here, I hope, right, it doesn't feel to me like it's the job of Kubernetes and containers really to try and address those scalability issues. I would look to like the cloud storage platforms and the existing storage vendors to bring their solutions to Kubernetes and integrate them with the applications that actually manage that data. It might seem like I'm being a little bit sloppy-shouldered and giving containers and Kubernetes a break there, but if I understand it right, I don't feel like that's the place of containers and Kubernetes. I think they put the primitives in place to be able to talk to all of these external services, and it's kind of more up to the applications and the vendors on either side, and they have to bring their A games and plug into Kubernetes. Yeah. I don't know if that helps at all.
It does. And really, my observation is more about, from a database, from a very large enterprise class, highly consistent, highly available database world, we try not to have to orchestrate it, right? We don't want to move it. We don't. Like, there's downtime, there's costs. That's why I think it's a physics problem, not a technology problem.
Yeah. Can I say as well, like, I remember when VMs were first a thing, and we thought like they were going to kind of get rid of all of the physical servers and mainframes and mini computers and stuff would all die. But what we see is like loads of VMs in data centers alongside mainframes and mini computers. And I think we're going to see containers and other things alongside maybe existing solutions that maybe be better at stuff like that at the moment.
Yep.
That's fantastic. And I know, Ed, I saw you writing notes down during Nigel's presentation. I'm going to assume you've got a few questions there.
Yeah, I actually got a question for George, and that's around, I mean, storage vendors, and what I see with customers is there's not one storage vendor at any customer. So I hope, it's kind of a hope and a question, how are you going to take this out to the world of other vendors, and how are you working with those other vendors, and when do you anticipate that kind of having a multi-vendor solution?
It's an excellent question. By and large, I'm a glass half full kind of person, so I'd like to think that the community is ripe for a common mechanism to define what an application means, and within the context of that, exactly how does that translate into performing data management functions for these applications of value. So as specifically in terms of NetApp's participation in the community, As you may be aware, NetApp was one of the founding members of CNCF. We were, I believe, a platinum member and board member to date. We have made great contributions on the storage SIG part of the house, and our plan is to really introduce this to the community in a way that it doesn't necessarily lock customers in a particular technology, but there must be some de facto, sort of standard de facto way of going about how we define particular, with respect to different distributions of Kubernetes. How do we back up an application? How do we restore it? How do we restore it in a different cluster or in a different namespace? There are valid questions here that frankly have not been answered by the community. And going back to Kara's earlier question, yes, data gravity is certainly important, but really, the deployment models have changed. Some customers almost, exclusively deploy certain applications in public cloud, whereas others do it on-prem. So as a storage vendor, as a community, I think we need to come up with toolings and methodologies in a way that it helps our customers really in a standard, uniform way, an equitable way, run their workload applications and be rest assured that their data is not going to be lost, whether they run them in the cloud or on-prem.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Ed, did you have any other questions, or do you want to bounce it around the panel a little bit?
I'll just hand it out, send a handout to Nigel in this. In the Crufton customers is amazing. I'm actually working with a customer now who's moving from mainframe all the way to Kubernetes. So yeah, it's a big jump, and so and that's the discussion of the panel somewhat is, how do we get from that crazy world that these big enterprise customers have with purchased applications, out-of-box software, and databases with dial-up modems still. So,
and it's a really relevant question right now when we think about some of the different institutions, financial institutions, and others. We've been seeing the reports in the news of companies that are their mainframes are being maxed out. They don't have programmers to keep them up to date. So that's such a relevant question. Nigel, do you have any reflections on what that migration looks like?
Sorry, on what the migration looks like, mate. It looks like pain, and more pain. I think it does. But if we dial it back a little bit, I don't want to get carried away here, right? This is a NetApp call, and I don't want to say that the sunshine is shining out of any vendor's back end, okay, right? But we absolutely need the vendors to come to this party with their A game, like I was challenging George earlier. I genuinely don't think it's the job of the core Kubernetes community to fix these problems. I see these problems as like outside of Kubernetes and really plugging into it. And if we don't get the vendors involved, and I'm talking about the storage vendors and the application vendors, we're never going to get there. I mean, I don't want to steal too much of the mic because I've spoken a lot already, but I also feel like I don't want to bring a downer onto the conversation. I do think the future's bright. I said that. But I don't want to get too carried away either by thinking, oh yeah, because everybody's piling in, it's going to get fixed overnight. I still feel like there's a long way to go. Like, I know that Cheryl posed the question at the beginning, but I'd love her opinion on some of this stuff as well.
Cheryl, do you want to chime in on that?
Well, she's a company. Yeah. She's now in with the CF. She's like at the beating heart of this.
Thanks, Nigel. In fact, my role is to look after the companies who are adopting Kubernetes and cloud native. So I do actually see a wide range of adoption paths, of journeys. And maybe to go back a little bit myself and my perspective. So I was a software engineer at Google from 2010 to 2015. So I've been thinking in containers for about a decade, and I really learned to build globally distributed, highly scalable software in this cloud native manner. So I am genuinely an evangelist for this. It's not perfect for everybody, but the capabilities and the scalability and the speed of deployment that you can get with this is something that I think has value to so many companies, especially at these kind of times, right? When, everyone's working from home, so Slack, the usage is suddenly crazy high. Same with Zoom, the peaks will go crazy high. And the reason that these companies can manage during these times is because they've architected their infrastructure to be scalable and highly available. So in terms of the actual journey to migration, I see two paths within large organizations. And I'm going to say one works better than the other. The one that I think works better is when there is a small team, perhaps even one person who begins, who can carve off a very, very small portion of what they're doing and prove that this works. Like the bottom-up developer-led approach and the community-led approach. And I think this works not only because, it's a smaller problem to solve, but also because these people tend to be very involved with the community, the open source community. And so they know how to get answers from people and how to talk to different people. The other side of this that I see is the large organizations who bring in, a sort of top-down mandate that this will all happen all at once. And then it becomes a journey that never ends, right? So I think that I'm not denigrating the value of bringing in, say a consultancy or doing a top-down mandate. Perhaps I think the approach can go from both sides, a sort of developer bottom-up led approach with some top-down support and executive support.
So what are
That's
your
fantastic.
thoughts then, Cheryl, and maybe the wider panel as well? Because I see a lot of people taking the approach of having this like sort of SWAT team that are specialists. And they're like, the problem that I see that comes after that, though, is they take a couple of applications and containerize them and learn a bunch of stuff. But they're like the elite developers within an organization, and especially large enterprises. It then becomes difficult to roll that out, if no disrespect here, but to the rank and file developer that's not at the bleeding edge, that doesn't do this in their spare time at home as well. Like, what is the panel's thought on how we make the transition from that elite team into like the wider organization?
When we ask Ram, direct that to Ram. Obviously, Ram, you're working with a lot of customers out there as your role as a cloud architect. What are your reflections?
Well, this is a real journey. So I really like the comment from Cheryl. I think it's a mix of both, actually, the both paths. You need really to rethink the overall from the ground to top. And this is not something that you can just say, we will migrate. There's no such thing as migration there. You really need to rethink the overall. You need to rethink your processes. You need to rethink your the way you deliver the software. You need to rethink the application itself. And that's where we see a lot of difficulties for large enterprise customers. For them, it's just like a new catalog of services that they want to bring from one side to the other, and it doesn't work.
No, an enormous amount of challenges that get opened up from that. And Michael, I can imagine from a not just a data protection perspective, but a general data management perspective, it opens up a whole lot of challenges.
Yeah, and I think so. The customers that I've been speaking to more recently, and this is a completely new game for me. This is very much like in the last year where I've been like focusing on this area, but you can't take a traditional virtual machine backup or even an agent-based backup solution to be able to protect fully or have a data management strategy around Kubernetes. It just doesn't work. And I think it goes back, and we're always the last ones to be thought about as well in any process, in any education. So I think there's a key education part where we need to be educating our ecosystem or industry like we are with sessions like this. I think there's a major change in that how do we look after that data. But ultimately, if we just look at the data that is being used from a Kubernetes standpoint, it's still data, it's still important. We still have to look after that data regardless of where it is. And so things like Project Astra, but also being able to, we want snapshots, we want to be able to replicate that data from here, there, and everywhere. But we also need that copy of that data out of band, away from the storage system for any of those corruption pieces. And that's the biggest education piece, I think. And we've got a chance really to shape what that looks like. Traditional infrastructure guys that are moving into this world alongside developers, need to be able to educate those guys, and it's a two-way thing, right? We need to understand what those applications look like and what the needs are from a data management point of view, but it's also about how do we construct and do things better from that point of view as well.
Yep, completely agree. And Jason, I know you've dipped your toes in this water, in these waters as well. What are some of your reflections, and especially in context to Michael's comments there, for the data management challenges?
So I think from my point of view, there's a few things here that we've spoken a lot about migrations. We've spoken a lot about how enterprises are doing it, how you're looking at from bringing in a SWAT team effectively. Now, I think that is great, and there are a lot of places where that will work, but we still have to remember that a lot of organizations are running in the enterprise on some very specific things. I know customers still running VB6 apps, and even further down than that. You know, these are things that we're going to have to come up with more targeted approaches at. So as Ron was saying about bringing in processes in general, new processes across the business, new learning for developers, we're going to have to bring all of those things together. When it comes to the persistence side of things, and we're talking about storage, yes, I mean, even something as traditional and simple as messaging. If you really need to have durability in your messaging, such as Rabbit or Kafka, those sorts of things, even an app like that that's not traditional, not a traditional database or storage platform, you need persistence for those. And you want those messaging platforms to be as close to your containers as possible, right? You don't want it to introduce latency by having them outside of the container ecosystem. So we've got a lot of challenges there, and we need to think about that and address each one of those as we come to it.
That's fantastic. Totally agree. And Chris, I could see you giving the thumbs up as Jason's commenting on that. It sounds like that's obviously something near and dear to you, and a problem and a challenge that we've got to be conscious of.
Yeah, I mean, I used to run an app that had 20 million users, so the messaging queue durability was absolutely critical. And even though that was a newer technology, we had to take the state of that very, very seriously. So that was near and dear to my heart. What we're talking about, and the gravity comment earlier, I really love speaking to this, and I just want to mention that, yes, data has gravity. We have bandwidth issues. Bandwidth is the last great frontier. We cannot fit the data through the pipe fast enough to get many terabytes moved from one cloud to another, one place to another, one server to another, without opening ourselves up to a lot of, let's screen it and wait till we get home and then bring it back and make sure everything completed right, all that crap we used to do. And we don't need to do that anymore. There are such things as data planes. There are things as data strategies. There are things as data fabrics. You can set it up so that you have your data, real-time consistent from a data center to a cloud or from one cloud to another. And then a migration is not nearly so much a problem. It's just the shell game. You're just doing a little magic trick. I've done this stuff for years in every manual formation you could possibly think of, from SneakerNet to the whole, home screen thing, 3 hours in, 3 hours out, 3 hours transform. We don't need to do that anymore. There are tools out there. A lot of them are not open source. I would love to see this in open source. But the fact of the matter is, when you're dealing with enterprise applications and data at this scale, you're going to want to pay for it a little bit, unless your engineering time is completely free, which no one's ever is. So, there's a mix or a hybridization, if you will, of open source and bespoke technologies or highly engineered technologies that are worth it in the overall ROI matrix. But we don't have to think in the old paradigms of data being impossible to get from one place to another in a timely manner. You just have to think about it and be strategic about it ahead of time, and have application policies that ensure that data is going to be synchronized, stuff like that. It's very near and dear to my heart.
Fantastic, Chris, and I knew it would be. I just want to remind everybody, as we're getting close here to wrapping up, there's a URL at the bottom of the screen for more information. There's also the URL to go to Nigel's site for the free ebook, and there is no password or code word. Just go to that URL. That will direct you to get the ebook absolutely free. And just real quick, as we wrap up here, I'd like to go around the horn real quick with the panelists for any final thoughts. And Cheryl, I'll start with you, and we'll wrap up with Karen. Cheryl, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I think one of the reasons that I'm so excited to work within the Kubernetes and cloud native community is because of the open source nature of this. And I'm very, very interested to see how companies and individuals get more involved with open source. And since that underpins everything we're doing, I think it if I had a suggestion to make to people is try and get into the community and try and be part of it, because you will get so much more out of it, and your dare I say, your infrastructure will be better built if you understand what other people are doing.
And that's a fantastic point, Cheryl. Why don't we? How would we want to direct people to the CNCF if they want to get involved with the community or get more information?
Well, in normal times, I'd say go to a local meetup, but that's not going to happen for a while.
That's right.
So almost everything is run off GitHub. So if you don't yet have a GitHub account, get onto GitHub. And then just start to look around like the CNCF repos, figure out who's talking about the same kinds of problems that you are, join some of the calls. All of the calls and meetings are completely public. So there's a lot of opportunities to get involved and just go for it, really.
Fantastic. And Michael, I'll pick on you next. Any parting thoughts as we think about data management and some of the challenges around Kubernetes?
Yeah, I would just really agree with what Cheryl just said, is that so this might seem very daunting to dip your toe in the water and learn something about Kubernetes, just a 101 type thing. It's really not. This is very new to me over the last 6 months, as I mentioned. There's tons and tons of content out there, free to everyone. I'm not going to plug Nigel's content anymore, but yeah, there's tons of stuff out there. Just go and listen to it, like 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, and it's a really, really, it's not that difficult. I might get massively backlash there for that, but yeah, it's not that hard. The only other thing that I'd ask is, if you are rolling that out into your businesses, then just think about the data. Now, stateless is easy because it's just code that's just going to spin up these containers and these applications that were once just one big server that had all the application on, and now they're hundreds of millions of containers, maybe not millions, but lots of containers. And now just think about the data and how and where you'd need that if there was a failure scenario in the environment, and just think about that now rather than the afterthought that backup was always an afterthought in our traditional infrastructure world.
Fantastic. Jason, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I want to come up on the education piece as well. I mean, it might feel daunting. Less than a couple of years ago, I was primarily an infrastructure guy, but the market's changing and we need to pivot and change. So I've picked up more cloud native, more Kubernetes, DevOps, and those sorts of things. There's a lot of resources out there. Embrace the community and pick that up. And then the other thing I want to say is think carefully about your data. We have a lot of processes in place, and there are a lot of things that we will deploy within the Kubernetes ecosystem that may be associated to stateful applications, but they don't need to be stateful themselves, because the CI/CD pipelines are going to take care of it, or our automation technology is going to take care of that. So think about which data it is that you really need to protect and you really need to move, and be very specific. And then one final passing thought, I think, is that I'd like to see more projects that are working on these open broker architectures. So there's an open service broker for Azure, and so that we can really easily plug into third-party systems, and evolving that ecosystem is going to be really important.
Fantastic. And again, thank you for joining, Jason. Ed, any parting thoughts?
Oh, sure, lots of them, but we'll try to keep this short. I mean, one of the things that's really changing the state of all of this is the kind of the economics, right? So Chris talked about a data plane, and one of the things the data plane can do is actually have multiple copies in multiple places, and it's cost effective in the way that the economics have changed. So as you think about your data, open your mind up to new ways of doing things and around where that data lives and how you mentioned replication, and that's kind of the key there. I think education is a key piece, and I appreciate all the work Cheryl and the CNCF does to kind of promote the community. There are lots of resources out there, so people need to dip their toes in. The cloud vendors, the one that I work for, Google and others, all have lots of free resources that you can go and experiment. So I think that's important. I see that with my customers is the challenge to get their people that are used to doing it the traditional way to think about things in this kind of newer way. And I'll leave with marketplaces are important, right? How do we get software that was in a box that's now in a Kubernetes somewhere where we can just buy it and say, run it in my Kubernetes environment. So get your Kubernetes up and bring in that application that used to run in Windows somewhere on-prem that you got a box, and now just install it in Kubernetes and run it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ed. That was great. And Karen, we'll wrap up with you. Any final thoughts?
Oh my gosh, so many. I love that everyone was talking about data. That made me very happy. I think my final thoughts are that having been doing this for 3 decades as a data architect, I think the thing most inspiring for me, the bright light, is that we have proprietary solutions, open source solutions. Most everyone is working all together. It's no longer seen as a competition. And definitely, I look forward to more and more of those of vendors who have solutions that aren't open source, still contributing to the open source development initiatives, as well as making their products work with these.
That's right. That's right. I think it's a great note to wrap up on, and especially the role of the ecosystem and the cooperation that exists in foundations like the CNCF to make these things reality, to bring the vendors, developers, and others all together. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. Of course, our keynote presenter, Nigel, all of our presenters, all of our panels, a special shout out and a thank you to Nick Howell, who's kind of doing some producing and directing behind the scenes. Thank you, Nick. And to kind of our chief producer here, Julie Zhu, who helped us pull this together. And a lot of work went into this very first one. I think we learned some lessons, had a few little technical hiccups here that we'll learn from as we do this again. We're planning on doing another one next month. Nigel, I'll give you the last word before we wrap up.
The future is bright, mate. It honestly is. I think we're living in a golden age of technology, where there are so many opportunities out there. Just, I would say, don't be overwhelmed by them. Take the opportunities and run with them.
And get Nigel's book, the Kubernetes book. Obviously, you can download it for free with the link below to get you started. And if you want more information about any of the topics that we've covered here, please go to the more information link at the bottom of the screen. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate our presenters, panelists, and our audience and all the great questions that came in during this discussion. Thank you very much. Have a great day.